This is our 7th lecture in this series, and the most important one, I think, from the perspective of why we're doing this. It's a critique of conventional economics, and I presented conventional economics or neoclassical economics last time, and the need for biophysical economics. And we are operated by and dominated by neoclassical economics, which for a long time, say roughly 1940 to 1973, seemed to work. People tended to be richer each year, and it was said each generation is better off than the previous ones. Depressions were minor and quote unquote cured with Keynesian economics, with government spending. And John Kennedy and certainly Lyndon Johnson were, whether they said so or not, were very much of that type. So we're going to start where we ended last time. That is with a consideration of some unresolved issues with conventional, that is, neoclassical economics. And we considered these previously, and I'm going to just repeat them now, that these problems with conventional economics that we see, and this is more from, some of them impact people enormously, as i.e. the first one, and others are perhaps viewed as more in the discussion of academic economics. So first we have unequal distribution, which is not new in world history, but is certainly characteristic of neoclassical economics, systems that are using that. And secular stagnation, the third one, these are things that affect people a lot.
Charles, are you sharing something or?
I'm sorry, can you not see this?
No.
I'm having trouble also.
Oh, excuse me. Let me see what's going on.
Do you have a share screen at the bottom?
I didn't click the share. I didn't click the button.
There we go.
All right, where are we now?
You need to start your PowerPoint.
Let's start all over.
I can
can't find it.
fix your recording. Just, yeah, go to PowerPoint.
Okay. So.
Okay, got it.
All right. Now, can you see now energy and economics?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna start all over. So this is the 7th lecture, a critique of conventional economics and the need for biophysical economics. The 6th lecture gave a review of conventional economics, and we're going to start where we ended up last time. First of all, for a long time, neoclassical and Keynesian was probably the dominant form at the time, seemed to work. Each generation was supposedly getting richer than others, especially in the United States, but around the world. And depressions were minor and cured with government spending. And certainly John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson operated more or less on Keynesian principles, and they seemed to work, and people were more or less happy. But there were some unresolved issues with conventional, meaning neoclassical economics. And these included things that affected people, unequal distribution and secular stagnation, inflation. These are things that impacted people directly, and people the general populace was aware of it. And then other things that were more within the realm of economics itself, that many of their concepts, such as the Phillips curve, as an example I will use, just simply didn't work, or once worked but didn't continue to work. And the explanation of the solar residual and increasingly what the economists called externalities, meaning environmental, for example, environmental or things that the market economy did not resolve. Now, all of these have a biophysical basis. Distribution, maybe not quite so explicitly, but all of these I'm going to begin to explain from a biophysical perspective, and then we're going to talk about what biophysical economics is and how we think about it and how you can use it. Now, first of all, let's take a look at the huge problem with conventional economics is, and it isn't just neoclassical economics, it's neoclassical economics hooked with capitalism, hooked with corrupt government, or just government in general, or whatever. But what has been going on is the bottom 50% of income earners earn less and less and less of the total economic pie, where the top 1% and the top 5% and so forth earn more and more. And this is pretty universally viewed as a real problem with how conventional economics works. And if you want to really dig into that, Thomas Piketty has written a book in great detail about all of these issues. You just look it up on the web and there's lots and lots and lots of stuff. So that's a problem. Now, here's a more academic thing. Phillips curve, energy price increases of the 1970s blows the theory to pieces. So let's take a look. And this is another example of where biophysical economics is more powerful than neoclassical economics in explaining some very fundamental economic issues. Now, the Phillips curve, as in the economic textbooks, looks like this, that there is an inverse relation between inflation and unemployment rate. So if your unemployment rate is 3%, that's now, for example, your inflation is 9%. Well, we had 9% just recently. So one might argue that this is sort of working today, but we've actually reduced the inflation quite a bit, while keeping the unemployment rate at 3%. So it's not working so well, maybe. But anyway, this was the theory, and this was very powerful in that one of our presidents, and I'm trying to remember whether it was Carter or it was George I, took actually threw people out of work, increased unemployment in order to bring the inflation rate down. And so these economic theories may be very powerful, but they affected people through policy. And this is a good example. However, if we look more carefully at this is a study I did many years ago and published many years ago. You see, from 1961 to 1969, there's the Phillips curve. Looks like it works great. But all of a sudden in the 70s, up to 1980, they both increased enormously. So the Phillips curve clearly no longer functions. What's going on? Well, this is a period during the great so-called American energy crisis, starting in 73 and going up through 1981, in which the price of energy increased. Now, when the price of energy increased, that's going to increase inflation, and we're going to talk about that a lot more. This is an externally imposed increase in inflation, and it also resulted in unemployment. Both factors are happening because of energy inflation increase, which increased inflation, decreased purchasing power, which decreased the need for workers and resulted in unemployment. So we have the fundamental way to look at the economy. If you're a neoclassical economist, it's a self-contained issue between firms and households, and it doesn't include external factors. But the external factor in this case, the price and inversely the availability of energy, is what we call in ecology a forcing function. It's something from outside the system that forces this inside of the system. And this is a perfect example of that. So if you look at it from that perspective, and I've written about this in great detail, is that the understanding energy helps you understand economics much, much better than if you do not include it. Secular stagnation. Well, the OECD, which is Europe and Japan and US, the richer countries, are the blue. And secular stagnation simply means that the growth rate has declined from 5% a year down to 1% a year. And that's still the case. The world is a little bit higher. Younger, poorer countries may have a faster growth rate. So secular stagnation, especially in Europe, is a big issue that involves many economists, and they don't have an explanation. But the evidence is obvious. The availability of oil, the growth rate of oil, which they consider to be a consequence of secular stagnation, in our opinion, is actually the cause of it, because you have less and less energy to do less economic work each year. And so this is the decline in the availability of all petroleum resources over time. So that's a perfectly good explanation for secular stagnation, which is otherwise, as they admit, unexplained by neoclassical economists. Okay, debt has been increasing. Well, we can't blame this on biophysical economics, or can we? Debt for both government debt and total debt has increased enormously, and Republicans like to blame it on Democrats. But Reagan, a lot of people don't understand this, and Bush, both of them, and Trump were in big leagues in terms of increasing government debt. And so when interest rates, I mean, one can simply say that recently interest rates have been low, so why not borrow? If you borrow at 0% or 1% and the inflation rate is 3%, then you're making 2% a year. So that works. You might say that there's a government, there's a reason to do it. Now, another place where conventional economics fails spectacularly, and in a way that's easily understood through biophysical economics, is the Cobb-Douglas production function. Don't ask me why, but traditionally economists have looked at Q as the production of goods and services, GDP, you might say, is a function of labor and capital. Remember, we said the classical economists said labor was important, and the neoclassical economists said capital. If you go way back, the physiocrats said land was important, but that got left out of future equations. And so when Denison in Solo originally, and Denison in much more detail, did this analysis of the increase of GDP as a function of capital and labor, and they could only explain half of the increase in in wealth, in GDP, from the increase in labor and capital. And the economists were very confused with that. And so the other half they called the solo residual. It was not explained by the model in a statistical sense. And so what they did was they Solo especially, and well, Dennison and others explained it as human ingenuity, as technology progressing and so forth. And I said to, I wrote Dennison once and I said, hey, look, we made Q a function of labor, capital, and energy, and solo residual disappears. And he wrote me back and says, gee, that's very interesting. That's a good argument. And his next book, he didn't mention that. He just did capital and labor. I don't know. So meanwhile, the most important economic issues were ignored because they're not included in prices. They're not included in market prices. And that's the only thing in the neoclassical model, i.e. population growth, depletion, climate change, environmental destruction. All these things that many of us might think are especially important are simply not in the neoclassical model. They're just not there. Now, here's the human population growth. We're 8 billion now and still going, although slowing down in some areas, Mexico, for example, but US. Okay, and there's, of course, many environmental issues, such as the increase in hurricanes. It's a big factor in Louisiana, I'm sure, Paul, and so forth. And the power of Lucy, no. Why is this so? Meaning, why is this ignored in the neoclassical models? And I think it's due to the intellectual isolation of academic economics. And it's an ignorance of and ignoring of the most basic laws of physics. And so I have said this many times, that how you think about economics or many other things, but economics depends upon your intellectual toilet training. And if you start as a humanist, as somebody who thinks humans are all powerful and control everything, as is often the case in the social sciences, or certainly in economics, and you don't understand that nature has very powerful controls on us, you just have a very different perspective. And that's why I'm very thankful that my original training was in ecology, where I thought all the time about nature and the limits of nature. All natural ecosystems have to live within the constraints of their daily input of sunshine. And sometimes a few permutations of that. And economists think growth is, God-given or part of, they figured out how to make it happen. Well, we're going to go on about that a little bit more. Hardly anyone mentions the main driver of economic growth, which is industrialization, which means the use of more and more fossil. And when I say fossil, there's a little nuclear and a little solar, like especially water power. Well, pretty important, but the fossil fuels are about 82% or so of the global and US economy, 80-odd percent. And that was true when I started thinking about this back in 1968, and it's just as true today. The percent from fossil fuels has not changed. The amount coming from solar has increased, but the amount coming from wood has decreased. The amount from hydropower is roughly the same, and the amount coming from photovoltaics and wind turbines, which are solar, That's increased to about 4% of total global and roughly the same for US energy use. So it's not very much yet. And fossil fuel use is still growing, not oil, but gas. And so the percent coming from solar is barely changing. It is changing a little, and we, of course, hope it changes a lot more. I mean, just look at this. This is the BASF, the big German petrochemical or chemical complex company in Germany. Where does their wealth come from? I mean, this is all run on oil and gas. So making all the stuff, I used to buy BASF cassettes and so forth. So making all kinds of consumer stuff, not to mention food. About 20% of all the energy, fossil energy used in the world is used for food production or preparation and shipping and so forth. So the dirty secret to wealth production is you use more energy. So this is on the bottom, coal and crude oil and gas and nuclear and hydro and other, and this goes up to 2010, and it's probably continues pretty much like that, except, as I said, oil appears to have reached its peak. I did this. This was a paper, a good paper we published back in 1984, called Energy in the United States Economy, a Biophysical Perspective. And that was the origin of thinking about biophysical economics. And Cleveland was my student, and I did this with Costanza, actually, Paul, and with Cleveland and Kaufman, who were two of my best students ever. And so this is the gross national product is almost exactly the same as fuel energy use. And they even went up and down. That's the first derivative on the upper graph. They went up and down together. And so when we had the oil crises, you see the economy had big impact. So this has been well known since certainly 1984, and quantitatively and qualitatively from before that. I should put that paper on our reading. And as other countries developed, I made this diagram a long time ago, Mexico and Korea, which had huge increase of wealth. See, this is GDP per capita on the y-axis and energy consumption per capita. And as most countries develop, US was a little bit squirrely here, but as they increased, increased in wealth, they increased in energy, or you might say as they increased in energy use, they increased in wealth. Costa Rica, a country that I looked at in great detail, didn't get any richer, but didn't use any more energy. You can consider that possibly a control. And so but I would like to add that, but Costa Rica uses what energy and what economic production they have, they use it very wisely and produce better health benefits on a much lower budget than we do in the United States, for example. So it's not just how much you do, it's how you do it. And we can perhaps talk about that. Certainly some few economists recognize the obvious fact that conventional economics was making a huge logical and applied error by not considering energy and resources more explicitly and in physical, not just price terms. And some 40 years ago in the journal Science, which was the best place to publish back then, and incidentally where our original biophysical paper was published, it was the cover issue of Science magazine. Vasily Leontiev, who was a great economist and helped us very much win World War II. as an economist. That's another interesting story. Surveyed, and he was a Russian who came to the United States and helped us organize our economic industrial production in a good way. Surveyed the then present state of economic models and economics in general and said they were unable to advance in any perceptible way a systematic understanding of the operation of a real economic system. Instead, they were based on sets of more or less plausible but entirely arbitrary assumptions, i.e. markets, i.e. neoclassical economics, leading to precisely stated but irrelevant theoretical conclusions. This is from a Nobel Prize winner in economics. What was the effect of that on conventional economics? Zero. Now, I read that and I was flipped out. I said, exactly. He extolled other investigators in demography, sociology, political science, ecology, biology, etc., to help remove economics from the splendid isolation in which it is found. And I will add, is still found. It is amazing. So let's respond to Leontief's challenge and try to generate a resolution to these issues. We start with the intellectual isolation of economics, if you will, their human-centered toilet training, intellectual toilet training, I should say. Who knows how they were originally done? It's the ignorance of and ignoring of the most basic laws of physics. Now, we know in science, you cannot break the basic laws of physics. If you find some machine that breaks the laws of thermodynamics, we know, now we're willing to look at it, we're willing to say maybe, but every scientist will know that machine is wrong. And because it breaks the laws of thermodynamics, and we have never found something breaking the laws of thermodynamics. So let's start with this. What is economics? You know, from the economists, the economics is the study of the allocation of scarce resources among competing ends. Now, when they say this, you got to be careful, because you might think resources like I do, you know, oil or water or soil or whatever. No. They mean, economists for resources means basically money in your wallet, your financial resources. That's it. That's it. I remember Paul Ehrlich telling me once his daughter was getting his PhD in Stanford, and he said, not in economics. And he said, not only did she not talk about the things I thought we might talk about energy or water or soil or other economic resources, he says, they didn't even talk about money. They just did math. And so this is a social definition of economics. It implies that scarcity is only relative scarcity, that humans are rational. Oh, that's an important one. Humans are rational and self-serving, selfish, essentially. That firms, households, and markets are all you need to make a legitimate economic analysis or understanding. That you can parachute an economist into any part of the world and he can make a model of the economics without considering the resources where he landed. That's a famous argument that was made by conventional economists. And it ignores the first 200 years of economic thinking. Because, you know, that the classical economists and certainly the physiocrats and even the mercantilists, that's where does wealth come from? So tell me the fairy tale about the economy. Well, just go ask your local economist. In the neoclassical worldview, wealth comes from capital. You see, in the 1970s, Solow dropped even labor from consideration. And this is the model, as we saw before. It's a perpetual motion machine where firms give goods and service to households, land, labor, and capital, and households provide land, labor, and capital to firms, and the money goes around in the opposite way. This will be in chapter 1 of essentially every economics book. And it's a fairy tale. No inputs, no outputs, no resources, no pollution. You don't need any energy to run it. It's crazy. So as natural scientists, we believe that these models of neoclassical economics use incorrect boundaries, is inconsistent with laws of thermodynamics, and is largely based on articles of faith rather than empirically validated science. And maybe the best single statement of that, I think, is a paper, Hall et al. In 2001. Reality is different. I put this figure in to get the attention of my students, and maybe you folks too. This is how economies work. It's not just capitalism, but it's they take resources, they take nature, put it into the industrial mill and generate money. I am unaware of any way to generate wealth without extracting and usually destroying some part of nature. It just is. And the more economic activity, the greater the destruction of nature. Here's another way, another cartoon that represents that. Free trade is a great way of sucking up the global natural resources and global cheap labor. And so much of the pollution generated by whatever you or I get at our shopping cart or at Walmart or whatever, at Costco or wherever, it comes from somewhere else in the world and made with cheap labor and cheap resources. Well, we would like to think that we could manage in Oregon our forests as a renewable resource, and to some extent we do. We produce our electricity renewably with dams, except it isn't, because we've knocked out most of the salmon. So how do you make wealth? You gobble up resources, use energy to do it and transform it into the goods and services that we have. Well, that's the way it is, folks. Quite simply, wealth is generated by using fossil energy to exploit the earth's raw materials and transform them into what we want. And to do this, we go through cycles of resource exploitation. I used to work mostly in the developing world, and this was data from Ecuador. And I had a wonderful student from Ecuadorian and spent some time in Ecuador. And you could just see them go through their natural trawl chimp on the bottom and their pelagic fish, meaning their wild fish, go through cycles of exploitation and destruction. And bananas had their day and then crashed. And let's see, I don't know what the purple is. Oh, the purple is shrimp raised in shrimp ponds. So they destroyed huge areas of mangrove to grow shrimp until the diseases took over. Anytime you make a monoculture, you set up for a good spreading of disease. Then they had a coffee boom, and that's gone. And now we've just reached peak oil in Ecuador. And what's next? It's tough for Ecuadorians, and my heart goes out to them. But they're having any place you find turmoil in the world, Peru, Ecuador, France a while ago, Iran perhaps is more complicated, Egypt, Syria especially have been very well analyzed. They've had their peak oil. and then you have the consequence of this, something beautifully analyzed by my friend Hafiz Ahmed. It's neither nor labor that nor capital that generates wealth, but nature, including especially the energy used by nature and also by humans to exploit nature. But most of today's economics is about mathematics. Economist Paul Krugman, I mean, he's one of my favorite economists. I read him all the time. He's in the New York Times often, and probably some of you read him. Said after the 2008 crash, he said, as I see it, the economist profession went astray because economists as a group mistook beauty clad in impressive looking mathematics for truth. Quoting Keats, indirectly Keats' ode to a Grecian urn here, which is thought a beautiful, beautiful quote. They mistook beauty clad in impressive looking mathematics for truth. The central cause, this is Krugman, the central cause of the profession's failure was the desire for an all-encompassing, intellectually elegant approach that also gave economists a chance to show off their mathematical prowess. That's not me, that's an economist saying. Here's from Heinrich et al. And also Gintis, other economists. Experimental economists and others have uncovered large and consistent deviations from the textbook representation of Homo economicus. I mean, that's economic man. Literally, or humans, literally hundreds of experiments in dozens of countries suggest that in addition to their own material payoffs, people have social preference, that they're not principally selfish, that they're not principally self-oriented. Subjects care about fairness and reciprocity and are willing to change the material outcomes among others at personal cost in themselves and reward those who act in pro-social manner while punishing those who do not, even when the actions are costly. Gintis did a series of experiments to show this. It's basic model assuming humans are fundamentally selfish is wrong. And anybody who has children understands that. The antidote is biophysical economics. And I represent a loose group of perhaps several hundred scientists and economists who believe that we need a very different approach to economics. And if you haven't gone to this website, you can go there and see where we have organized a group of scientists and business people, investors to try who understand this very well, very, very well. And take a look, but let's look at the basics. What do you, when you talk to an average person and ask, what does economics mean to you? They will normally answer, food on the table or a roof over my head, perhaps a car in the garage. This is material things, it's stuff. And it takes energy to get. It's about stuff. There's a great article in the web called It's About Stuff that is good to read if you're interested. Most importantly, why is economics, which is mostly about stuff, taught as a social science? Well, this is because of this diamond worth of water paradox that was solved by the neoclassical economists, and the idea of we value different things depending on how much of it we have or want, and this interplays in the market, and that's it. It's social. What economics needs is a secure biophysical foundation that is consistent with and reinforced by what students are learning in the physical and life sciences. And I've had a lot of students who would come to me and say, what I learn in my economics classes is inconsistent with what I'm learning in my classes in physics and chemistry and ecology and so forth. So, I think I pretty much said this is this is what biophysical economics is, an increasing and increasingly vocal subset that has focused on the internal logical and empirical inconsistencies of the basic neoclassical theoretical model and the failure of that model to represent reality and laws of nature, laws of science. And consider modern economics to be an ideology wrapped in a blanket of near impenetrable jargon and mathematics with only a tenuous or at best extremely incomplete relation to the biophysical world upon which it must rest. Okay, so what is our first question? We're going to re-answer it. What is economics? Economics is a study of the use of fossil energy to exploit the Earth's raw materials and to transform them into what we want. And one of the most important things, and I want you to, if nothing else from this course, I want you to remember this. Take $1 out of your wallet. That dollar that says pay to the bearer $1. That dollar has no meaning unless it's backed by energy. What it should say is this dollar, depending on inflation, but this right now, this dollar allows the bearer access to about 5 megajoules of work. What's 5 megajoules? That's a little less than half a coffee cup's worth of oil. Without the energy, the dollar has no meaning. So every time you take $1 out of your wallet, think 5 megajoules or think about half a cup of oil worth of energy. There you have it. Now, it depends somewhat on what you spend it on, but on average, that's pretty close. Now, let's look at how an economist, this was in 1990, old work that I did, looked at the US economy in 1990. They said, here's the US economy, the average for one person for 1 year, $3,000 worth of capital was used, $2,000 hours of labor to produce $23,000 of GDP. There it is. That's it. That's Solo's equation. Here's an equally legitimate view of the same economy, the same year. Here's the economy, and here's the input. 2,500 kilograms of oil, 3,000 kilograms of coal, 2,000 of gas, hydronuclear, et cetera, biomass, 140,000 kilograms of water, 1,000 of wood, 81,000 of rock. All of these things are being done in your behalf to run the US economy. The numbers are a little bit different today, but they're probably not terribly different. And the output isn't just GDP, it's CO2, particulates, various pollutants, and so forth and so on. That's the US economy. What is wealth and where does wealth come from? Money is our usual measure of wealth, but not money is notoriously slippery, and printing more money does not make us richer, it just leads to inflation. But some people think we should use a harder measure, usually gold. But when in the 1500s, Spaniards doubled the quantity of gold in the old world, they halved its value. It was like printing money. The real wealth was from the energy used there, from the sun, rain, and wind, and from the activity of foresters, fishermen, farmers, housewives, artisans, etc., who did the physical work to generate the wealth. And if you doubled the gold, it's like double the money. Well, we know now about inflation and so forth. Why? For everyone who wants environmental constraints, there are 100 who want to grow the economy. And how do you grow the economy? Well, you pour in more energy, more resources. So I became early convinced that virtually all development has been done simply by applying more energy. And go back to the Wilsons, seems like everybody is evolving but us. And as we've discussed, a spear point is an energy concentrating device. Fire obviously is a source of energy to increase the amount of food we can eat by cooking it, and agriculture is refocusing solar energy, and then we have fossil fuels. So there you have it. If you look at GDP at current prices, and this was 1998, and this is the amount of oil that's used, with USA way up at the top. And, you know, it's not a perfect correlation, but it's pretty damn close. That the wealthier countries use more energy. Some countries like Saudi Arabia use a lot of energy to produce the energy that Germany, Japan, and the US uses. So it's a little bit tricky. Not very tricky, though. Remember this? Let's make a more realistic version. This is how real economies work. You got to start with the energy sources, the sun, geophysical, and nuclear. That interacts with Earth ecosystems to do various economic activities, the most important of which is running the water cycle, which is run by the energy of the sun. Evaporating water from the seas and lifting them up to mountaintops, where it then comes down in rivers and provides agriculture with water and forests and natural ecosystems, and occasionally in the past deposited fossil fuels. And geophysical, interacting with minerals, concentrated minerals, to make areas that we can extract copper and iron and so forth. The first step that humans do is exploitation. Cut down the forest, put in pastures. Certainly we see a lot of that around here in Oregon and agriculture. And all using in very intensively fossil fuels, even making now apple pickers. So we don't need humans to pick apples. Makes me sick. Excuse me, I shouldn't introduce my viewpoints there. And then humans exploit fossil fuels with drilling rigs, with dams to get solar water, and various diggers to get stuff out of the ground. And then we process things with a butcher block, a sawmill, a petroleum refinery, an electrical plant, a Bessemer project, steel producer. We manufacture stuff, we consume it. This interface here is all that neoclassical deals with. But this is the minimum diagram, which I prepared back in, I don't know, 1980. This is the minimum diagram I would accept as a real representation of an economy, and which I would teach freshmen how economies work. Not the firms and households, but this. And in this, matter and energy track along in all the steps, and the energy is eventually released as heat, and eventually the matter ends up mostly in the junk pile. So there is a real economy. Is this used by economists? Mm-mm. Only a few were my friends. There's another view of it in color. Now, what happens if the energy to run all of this is less available? Well, it is becoming less available, and it's likely to become a lot less available, especially in the lifespan of the younger people. So here again is secular stagnation, oil growth, and the GDP growth. What about efficiency? Supposedly we are becoming more efficient in turning energy into GDP, are we? Well, not clear. If you look at economic production year to year, you have to correct for inflation. And there are those out there who believe that the inflation rate is greatly underestimated by governments because governments are embarrassed by inflation, so they tend to decrease it. So some people, shadow stats were one. There are others think that our official rates of inflation are too high, and if you put in correct rates of inflation, there has been little or no increase of efficiency. Also, although the efficiency of the highly industrialized countries has increased somewhat, for the globe it has barely changed, implying that much of the production of much of our economic heavy lifting, making steel and petroleum and other things, is done in the developing world. So that's a complicated question, but I'm saying we are not necessarily getting much more efficient, probably getting a little more efficient. Okay, this is again the secular stagnation. We've talked about this. Inflation, stagflation, and so forth. I want to talk about labor productivity. This was in our 1984 paper, labor productivity, where supposedly labor is producing much more per hour because much more dollars per hour because we're making them more clever. But when we looked at how much energy we used per worker hour by labor, we found a very close correlation. In other words, we get labor productivity not through technology or not through technology alone, but by subsidizing, making laborers' muscles bigger with fossil fuel. And you can certainly see that if you pay attention to farmers with bigger and bigger tractors. Okay, we've talked about this, and this is when my friend, remember, this is the Cobb-Douglas production function with only capital and labor and with a large 50% solar residual. And then my friend Rainer Kummel said, well, let's add energy to that equation. And he gets almost perfect fit with an energy, with labor, capital, and energy, and the increase of GDP for Japan, Germany, and the United States. So we have lots of empirical evidence that we can explain all kinds of things with biophysical economics that conventional economics cannot, or attributes to such weird things as solar and incorrect things as solar residual. Remember the limits to growth. The limits to growth is the most successful economic model that ever has been made, even though it's castigated by the economists. This is where we are now with respect to the limits to growth. The original model is given in dotted lines, and the data to date in the solid line. And this is 50 years later. How many economic models are this accurate 50 years later? And the limits to growth model is basically our most fundamental biophysical model. Okay, this is more or less where we are with respect to fossil fuels. A lot of growth, we're rattling around here, probably increasing a little bit for all fossil fuels, decreasing for oil, and we're going to be going down into the future. This is where most of our economic and financial theories were derived. What economic theories are appropriate here? Biophysical economics can tell us a lot, I think. So I hope to have shown you that Real economies need to be studied as biophysical systems using quantitative and natural studies. I would like to say how you do that. We have published on how you do that. I'm not going to talk about that here unless requested to. But we're applying it right now in Mexico. And the entire economics department of the University of Guadalajara, the fourth largest university in Mexico, is turning from neoclassical to biophysical economics for their basic teaching and analysis. And I'm involved very much in that, and so is Kent, and we're very excited about that. The evolution of human society has been mostly about sequestering more energy. Fossil fuels, and especially oil, are the main reason that human numbers and economies have grown. Human societies cannot possibly be sustainable at anything like our present level with a large flow of cheap, i.e. high energy return on investment energy. The availability of oil in the immediate future is of considerable concern, let alone the far future. That this may be our greatest issue related to sustainability of humans and civilization, but nobody talks about it when they talk about sustainability. As far as I know, only myself and a limited number of others, and almost no economists or other people, are discussing sustainability this way. Okay, with respect to all this plethora of economics, classical from last week and neoclassical from last week and biophysical from this, where are we now? Talking about the United States, Europe's a bit different and so forth. We are stuck in the United States in a hodgepodge of these economic concepts, accentuated by political oddities and enthusiasm. So I had a close friend say to me that he thought Adam Smith was basically correct when he said that our wealth comes from, essentially laissez-faire, comes from the actions of the butcher, the baker, the brewer, and so forth. He quoted that to me. And I said, did you know that Adam Smith had many other aspects and many other attitudes about economics besides that he was distrustful of business people, that he wrote a whole book called Moral Sentiments? And he had no idea. He had no idea. So coming from his rather free market perspective, he's a very successful businessman. He takes little bits and pieces of economic understanding that supports his perspective on things, as I hear every night on the news. President Biden is essentially a neo-Keynesian. He wants to, he doesn't say that, political death, but he wants to rebuild American infrastructure with deficit spending. Well, that's pure Keynesian. Neither good nor bad. It's what it is. It's good and bad. The Federal Reserve is attempting to tamp down some of this, the resultant inflation. Okay. And we are left with a legacy of Reagan-Bush past tax cuts that is crippling our ability to balance the budget. And they're just all legacies that aren't absolute truths. They're just happen to be what's left from past economic thinking. And I love this next quote here from John Maynard Keynes. He said, practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slave of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority who hear voices in the air are distilling their frenzy from some academic scribbler of a few years back, So that's where we are in economics today. This is long view of the human situation, perhaps. Here were our ancestors, which we've discussed, in using their energy concentration spheres. Then from, we might start this graph a little bit earlier, but the use of fossil fuels. And we have this enormous spike, probably not ending in 2025, but probably ending by another generation, and probably in decline from now until then. And here in 3,000 years is our ancestors going forward with the innovation of a bow and arrow. So whether this is true or not depends, I think, upon whether we acknowledge the reality of a biophysical base for economics. And all of that, of course, is in our textbook by Hall and Plitgard, in nauseating detail and lots of references. And if you're interested in what you learned in this class and you want to dig deep, that's one place, or you can simply email me. And I would like to say, please have some questions for next week. I'm going to review the course, and then I'm going to ask you for more questions, and I sure hope you have some. And here we are. And here's my final professional goal. Isn't that an amazing picture? I mean, an amazing physical, that rock is just sitting there. This was taken in Tierra del Fuego, the far end of the world, in the very tip of Argentina. The end. Okay, Paul, wake up and run the discussion. Well, I guess I'll run it myself. Okay.
Hopefully he's only asleep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's.
So Charles, does that mean there's no lecture next week? It's discussion?
Oh, well, I will maybe use a third of the time to review what I've said.
Okay.
And if you force me, then I guess I'm going to have to talk, but I sure hope you're going to be doing some talking, and I'm
Okay.
going to be doing some responding. Let's practice doing some, raise some hands now. With Paul asleep. Hey, Paul! Gosh, wonder if I have his phone number. Okay. And you have a question. Ray, you have a question.
Yeah, I have a question. In one of your definitions of economics, it's producing what we want. It seems like we would have been better off if we could have started off producing what we need.
Yeah.
We cut down a lot on
Bothered
that.
me a whole lot in the past, and still bothers me, is that our wants are manipulated.
Mhm.
I think about, if there were no advertising, then I would have a lot more, I would believe that the neoclassical model of supply and demand would have a lot more credibility. But if half of what we purchase is manufactured in us and is no way a need or anything like that, then that's a very different issue. And, there you have it. I mean, good Lord. Anne.
Well, I was just thinking about Yuval Noah Harari. You know, he's written that book, *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*, and I was struck by his comments that money is a fiction in the sense that it has no inherent value and exists only as a shared belief. And obviously his point is that we do have to have shared beliefs.
We need more than that. We need to have the physical reality of energy and the material stuff behind it.
Well, and actually, I mean, you think about you know, money as a construct or a fiction, and I think the other thing is
I don't
that,
think it's a fiction. I think
well,
it's,
it exists, but it doesn't have, we're giving it the value that it has. And, the dollar bill that you referenced is its value is a kind of a shared belief. But the other thing that I think is a fiction and that operates as a very fundamental biophysical fiction is mortality. And so that under, I think the consumption and a lot of other things like that are fueled by the idea of infinity for an individual. And I see that operating, my background is in the pharmaceutical industry, and sort of an inherent belief that if you simply consume medications, that you will live indefinitely and maybe even, become immortal. So there are a lot of things that I think we operate on that are fictional, and that drives systems that are not serving us. Of course, most of my background professionally was in contraception. And so you talk about, the idea of sustaining a ever increasing population with the materials that exist. And, it seems like even a child would recognize that that's not possible.
I wrote a paper once with 3 of my students called The Environmental Impacts of Having a Baby.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, that's when I got some hate mail. But we looked at all the stuff that was sort of similar to the graph I showed today in a way, that, but multiplied by, 70 years, just an enormous amount of stuff that one new human would bring into the world. And I'm certainly not saying don't have babies, but that's part of the package that nobody talks about.
Well, and for our age group, the other thing that people don't talk about is all the stuff we have that no longer has any value to anyone. And when we all eventually die, that stuff has to go someplace, and that's the landfill. And pretty soon they're not going to take it in the landfill.
I don't know if you can see that. It's much bigger than it looks. It's vinyl. It's all by vinyl operas and tapes and so forth. And I'm looking for some young opera singer who would like to have 24 versions of La Boheme to practice with. And somebody said, well, you can't do that because they can look it up online. But if any of you know anybody in the music department, I would love to. I have a marvelous collection of opera and classical music that I'm actually going through all my vinyl. I did yesterday. I'm up to Borodin playing it's all alphabetical, and I'm trying to play all of my old vinyl and relive some memories from that. So I'm sensitive, Ann, to what you say there. Yes, Cassie. Turn off your mic. Turn on, yeah.
You know, a resource for your vinyls might be Vinyl and Biscuit in Talent. Now, he does mostly rock and roll, but he has, I think, a pretty good knowledge in the music industry, and he might be able to give you some resources on where you could donate or deposit those vinyls for opera and classical music.
It's called Vinyl and what?
Vinyl and Biscuits. It's in Talent.
I just been wondering if they have biscuits.
Biscuit is the name of the dog. And because I've gone to that place twice, and he's got a pretty great record collection. So, and he buys and sells.
Sounds like a great outing for your dog too, Charles.
Where in Talent is it?
I want to say it's on Main Street. It's you
Talent
you
isn't very big.
huh?
Talent isn't very big.
It's
No, it's not very big.
Camelot.
Just Google it and it'll give you the address.
That's
Okay.
about 100 yards from the Camelot Theater.
Exactly. And then you could just call him perhaps and then discuss with him over the phone. But I think face to face is always so much more powerful than a phone call.
Yeah, and maybe he's got biscuits. I don't know. I guess not to eat though.
Yeah, this is his dog. He hangs out there. Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, we when we moved a year and a half ago from Montana, we had a barn up there, and I can't tell you how much stuff we gave away and put to the dump and tried to give away anything valuable. And let me tell you, I'm 80 now, and you got to do it while you're still physically capable. I don't think this year I could move again. It was really brutal for my wife and myself. So you've got to think about it. Okay, well, have a good nap.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, we missed having a question from you. So you got any questions?
Well, it seems to me that this social science is, it violates all the sort of principles of science in that
Of natural science.
it doesn't come out of the data. You have these theories that are sort of posited, and they have tremendous staying power, regardless of whether they serve any function for prediction or.
Well, Paul, social science should not violate the laws of thermodynamics or the other laws of nature that we know. And so you might say social science presumably exists independent of social scientists. And there must be a social science that is consistent with physics and whatever. But we don't have that. It isn't represented in at least economics. Now I know lots of economists who actually use the scientific method. And what is science? It's whatever uses the scientific method. You may not go through these steps as you do your science, but you've at least righted it as if you did, of observation, hypothesis generating, test, and control. And the most important feature is repeatability, that somebody else can recreate whatever it is that you did. And then we call it science. And in economics, in fact, there's quite a lot. And I reviewed it once. I have a paper on that I was actually looking at yesterday. It's, what was it called? An idiosyncratic assessment of economics, I think it's called. And I found that, in fact, some economists would use the scientific method and test hypothesis. I mean, Gintis is an example, but he's a good one. And I was impressed that it was used a lot, but it was mostly used on trivial issues and not on testing the essentials of economics, which to my knowledge has never been done formally and fully.
But it doesn't seem to limit its respectability or,
No,
I mean,
No.
I would say in general, the field of economics is much more powerful in the world of of policy and politics and so on than anything that people do
Anything
in
I say
laboratory.
or any of my crew.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But there's
Yeah.
no, it doesn't matter if it's wrong. They just go on the next day. Like,
Well, for
people,
hundreds of years, we had two views of the universe. We had Copernicus's view, and we had Ptolemy's view. And for hundreds of years, people still use Ptolemy's view because it was a better predictor. And it took a long time for Copernicus to be accepted by the general, what we'll call scientists of the time. And the reason was that Copernicus was a damn good mathematician, and his model was a better predictor. And people thought they could see the sun go around the earth. Every day they saw that. You see this, to me, I'm amazed when I look at pictures. I sometimes look at pictures and you see the stars go across the sky. What's really neat is when you can get a picture where the stars stay still and you watch the earth, the mountains and so forth. That's what's really happening. But it isn't what you perceive. So people perceive money in dollars. That's how they perceive economics day to day. And the economists just act as if they're logical extensions of everybody's practicality. And they've been successful that way. Now, I do believe that as oil becomes less available, there are going to be, and certainly in Europe now, there are many people turning to, by one name or another, biophysical economics, because they are finding themselves very energy constrained, which constrains all their other economic options. And so there's a much greater appreciation of this in Europe, and it's increasing, I think. And my stuff was written up as a full page editorial in this summer in the London Sunday Times. So the Europeans, some of them, are paying a lot of attention to this. And I've said this to you earlier today, that if we didn't have fracking, the United States right now would be in a really, really difficult position relative to Russia, Ukraine, and the supply of oil, because Russia supplies about a quarter of the world's oil, and gas. And so fracking, which I don't like, I have to acknowledge, has saved our trail in this situation, in this political situation. Now, it's a difficult situation and so forth, but that's reality, because we are producing of conventional only half of what we were in 1970. And the difference, as I showed, was made up. I think I'll put that picture in my review next week. So
okay.
I want to, it's not quite time for closing, but we're approaching, and I want to invite any of you to write to me, whatever your opinions are, about whether I should give this course again, how it should be different, if at all, or if a lot, or whatever, and ideas about where we might go with this, whether we can make a package, and I think Paul and maybe Ann, I hope, will help me do this, that we can easily export to the world. And then whether we could make it available to Ollie more generally. I understand there was one person who made his lectures available to 80 different Ollies, Ollie or Ollie, however you pronounce it. And
Yes, that's true. And it's a pilot study through the National Resource Center for Ollie. They're trying to decide whether to expand it. It's a little problematic because a number of ollies pay their instructors, and they have membership fees that are all over the place, ranging from what we charge, $150, to Berkeley's program, which is closer to 1,000 per member. So, so some of that distribution, may or may not happen. But I do know that there are definitely people within our Ollie at SOU that would find this of interest, and
No, I would like every freshman in college in the United States to listen to these lectures. Do you people
Yeah.
think that would be good?
yeah, I mean, the scales are up my
Some
eyes.
yeses, yeah.
Well, I think probably the work we have to do is to integrate the literature with the PowerPoint, so that you can, if you have a question, you can immediately go and find the.
Oh, I can make myself available to answer on email people's questions unless it gets ridiculous.
Oh,
It would get ridiculous.
Well, the problem is I wrote a great article, and I got to put this on there, in when Trump was president, and he was getting credit for the economy doing so well, which it was. And I wrote an editorial, it's quite short, for the Hill, which is I guess it's the only political place I've ever published. And I said, Trump has losers to thank for his economic success. And it was that at that time, fracking was an economic losing proposition for the investors. And yet it made oil half the price as it was during the Obama administration, and half the price as it was during, as it was in Europe at the time. And that made the US economy really strong, I think, independent of Trump. And I wrote that as an editorial, and I got some 900 responses, of which only 2 understood the point I was making, and the other 898 were discussing the politics of Trump versus the Democrats. And it's a really good lesson in how we've been brainwashed to think of everything in terms of these political positions, as opposed to the reality, I would say in large part the biophysical reality of what's actually going on. So I'm going to send out that post, that article to everybody. And I think if you understand that article and you understand why most of the responses are incorrect, you are beginning to get what I'm trying to teach in this course.
yep.
Yes, Ann. Oh, sorry, Paul, you run it. Now that you're.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how different things are from what they seem.
Ann?
Well, it's just Alice in Wonderland.
Can't hear you.
I say it's just Alice in
No,
Wonderland.
no, I can't hear Ann.
No, I was just thinking that would be an interesting exercise for you to write something in the popular area about what the policy implications of
Find a publisher and I'll write it tomorrow.
Oh, well, you could be like me and you could self-publish. That's kind of the new thing. I mean,
I do it all the time.
there you go.
Got 100 readers.
I mean, I don't know, 50 Shades of Grey was started as a self-published book. So there you have it.
If you can figure out how I can do that, then let's talk some more.
Okay.
All you have to do is make it sexy.
Yeah, that's right. What are
Make it sexy?
Yeah, what are
What, I had
the,
a picture of a naked woman in my talk today. What can you need more?
You need more,
yeah.
but you have to have men too, you know.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, what is the energy return on investment of sex? There we go. That's your title.
Well, you know, I don't talk about it much on this this presentation, but I'm very involved in writing papers on evolution, on energy and evolution and sex. And if you want, I can drown you in more technical papers that are discussing these kinds of things. And you know, I'm trying to do the same with my colleagues, Jim Brown and others, in ecology, on how to make this work, how to bring this energy perspective into evolutionary biology where it belongs. And so,
Certainly, once we went away from cellular division to sexual reproduction, things really changed, didn't they? When we got our mitochondria and started getting more complex, you can go way back.
we do.
Okay.
We include viruses and bacteria in our assessment. You're a biologist, I guess, at least in part. You want to? I'll send you a few of these papers. Do I have your email?
Me? Yes, you do.
Yeah, I
Well,
got you.
if you're going to send it to her, why don't you put it on the?
Yeah.
Oh, most people don't want to read this stuff. It's very
Well, you
academic.
could just have it in a
Yeah,
separate.
but it's easy to delete. Send it.
Yeah.
Just send it to everyone. And if you don't want to read it, fine. If you do, it's there.
Okay.
I want to read it.
Because this is like you're striking sparks off a rock or something, with a blade, and
Well, I'm obsessed with energy. I used to think I was obsessed with fish, but I'm obsessed with energy. And would you have said that 50 years ago, Paul? Would you have said then I was obsessed with energy?
Well, you were obsessed with energy flows through ecosystems,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't say that you had broadened out to
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
Well, Charles, given the lack of the science following of neoclassical economics, I think I would be really interested in understanding or what actions a biophysical economics would say we should take for the future versus what our current economic predictors are telling us to do.
Yeah, I agree.
Fasten your seatbelts, fatten the hatches for less available energy, less economic wealth, more inflation. That's how people see it. Already you're seeing it, more inflation. Just think about this. If the energy companies have to use more energy to get their energy as EROI is going down, then I think the main thing you're going to see is inflation, and inflation that is not going to be particularly pervious, that is impervious to the actions of the Fed, or to some degree will be and is now, and is so in Europe, and that consequently, the best thing we can do is to reduce our population. I find people writing editorials arguing that the growth rate of China is going down, and that's a terrible thing for China. And I can't imagine that there's anything that's better for China. And likewise, even the United States, there are many people at our borders, and my heart goes out to them. But United States without immigrants now is a decreasing population, which is a good way to maintain some semblance of modern civilization. It's a complicated issue, but it's Mexico, for example, has I understand very nearly stopped growing. Has gone from something like 7 children per woman to 2 point something, in a matter of only 10 years.
Yeah,
And
so I'm thinking maybe we could spend more time in your last class discussing sort of the actions the biophysical economics would say we need to take. Because what people are concerned about is really what their quality of everyday life is. And, you know, we
Well-
have high expectations and, but on the other hand, we're focused a lot on stuff. So it seems like really what we want to maintain is our happiness quotient.
well,
Social interactions can be much cheaper than producing stuff to maintain your happiness.
and I actually have some material I can say about that, and I'm trying to find a note card. So I've got some graphs I want to include. And that's part of it.
Okay.
Now I had something I wanted to say.
Probably about happiness.
Well, I will say that next time, but I had another, how did you begin, Ray? How did you begin that last discussion?
It had to do with
Of what we can
actions
do in the future?
and predictions and setting us up that we maybe need to change what we
Yeah.
consider what we value in our everyday existence.
We have to do it officially because every politician runs on more stuff.
Yeah, I know.
And how do we get around that one? But I will try to address that. Oh, I know what I was going to say. My biggest concern, I'm actually, now this is a personal statement. I am very much a Jeffersonian Democrat, I guess one would say, and or in favor of Jeffersonian democracy, and that has nothing necessarily to do with the Democratic Party. That's not what I'm saying. And I think I studied in great detail at Colgate, where as an undergraduate, they had a marvelous course called American Ideals and Institutions, a 2-semester course. And in that, we studied the founding fathers, and I don't know, mothers, but we didn't. And their predecessors like Thomas Paine and others. And I came away enormously impressed with what these people were saying. And I felt in response to the January 6th, assault on the Capitol, that the Constitution protected us on that day. And the thoughts of these people back then protected us on that day. And the problem is, as resources decline, inflation increases, and certainly all around the world, as in Ecuador that I talked about today, the populations are becoming more restless, and it's becoming more difficult to govern. As Nafeez Ahmed, and that his book has to go on our list, Paul. As Nafeez Ahmed has developed in his biophysical triggers of social, I don't know, violence or something like that. And it's a great book to read. And incidentally, many resources are on that BPE Institute site. I am worried about this progression. Declining ROI, increase in inflation, more civil disruption, more difficulty in government because people blame governments when they should be blaming biophysical issues, leading to chaos. You see that in France, where the Algerian source of their oil has enormously declined, and gas, and so forth. So in Peru, in a different way in Iran, in certainly terribly in Egypt and Syria, in other places, Venezuela, very much in Venezuela. All of these issues are very steady progression. And I feel that if the public doesn't understand them, then we're doomed.
Well, the only thing I would add to that, Charlie, is that these things have happened, cycles like this have happened over and over.
Yeah.
I mean, we think climate change is the dead ender, but there
lots
have
of
been
people-
other cycles of, there's a book called I think The Coming Dark Ages, which is really saying these are cyclical developments. And
Well, I've got an email from a friend, Michael Dowd.
oh, I'm Michael Dowd. I was going to bring up his name. Yeah, I saw him recently.
Yeah, you were the one who were you the one who told me? I don't remember. But anyway, I mean, I know Michael from the past, and I'm halfway through his talk, and I'm so depressed I can't push the button to see the rest of it. But he claims it's a positive perspective on what we can do.
Yeah,
by,
he says, what is it? Doom, no gloom, he says.
I don't know what he-
Yeah. But
so-
I have to run, so
Yeah, it's time to end all of this. I thank you all, and I hope you stay with me not only next time, but indefinitely, and see what we can do, okay?
okay. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, Charlie.
Okay, bye.